Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's BAInsights. And today, I'm really pleased to have two excellent guests join us talking about functional analysis and models. Before we get into that, I'll shortly ask for some introductions. If you haven't subscribed already, please do. And if you're watching the video and you've got comments of your own, information to share, or questions, please feel free to do so. All right. Without further ado, Gustavo, would you mind just giving yourself an introduction, please?
Yes. Hi, John. Hi, Sejal. My name is Gustavo. I'm a business analyst in the fintech industry, currently working at Multiply Tech in Milan. My background is in banking, finance, and data analytics. I have over 8 years of experience helping business optimize process, make data-driven decisions, and bridging the gaps between businesses' needs and technology. I have lived and worked across Argentina, Spain, and now actually I'm in Italy. So I believe I can bring like an international point of view to the business analysis.
I think so. Yeah, excellent. Thank you, Gustavo. And Sejal?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, John, for having me here. I know it's quite difficult to match everyone's timeline, so thank you so much for arranging this session. I'm Sejal Agarwal, and I'm from India, and I have been working as a business analyst since 8 years. And I mainly work with the different domains, e-commerce, infrastructure, and currently with aviation industry. I work with Indigo Airlines and work on many international codeshare projects for the American Airline, Turkish, KLM. And my main work is to cater the requirement of their business need and convert them into the successful and solution, which will be visualized and help the organization. And I mostly enjoy solving the problems, which I guess everybody does. And I also like to collaborate with multiple stakeholders on the different industry, and even if they are on the different team. Thank you.
Excellent. And I think you'll be in a perfect position, as well, Gustavo, to share your insight on functional analysis and models as a session as well.
Yes.
Brilliant. Well, let's dive straight into it then. In terms of, what is functional analysis, Gustavo, and why is the use of models beneficial?
Okay, in my perspective, functional analysis is the process of understanding, analyzing, and defining how a system works, how a process works in order to meet specific goals. It involves breaking down in small pieces, identifying pinpoints, and proposing improvements. In my case, using models is beneficial because it helps me in a visual way to complex process, show them in a simple and structured way.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Gustavo. And Sejal, what would be your view on what is functional analysis?
So based on my experience, yes, like Gusto mentioned, that yes, it is a process which will help us to break down a very complex, either it's a system, project, or process, into a sub process which will be manageable and can be look into the individual to see what will be the input and output criteria. So with the help of this, why it is so beneficial to help into the industry and for a business analyst like us, it will give us the clarity and streamline the work into the structured way, which will help even for the non-stakeholder to understand, yes, how the big system are working internally.
Great. Yeah, and just to build on what you both said there, I mean, it's probably interesting to, I think a lot of BAs are probably doing functional analysis and not necessarily realizing that that's what it's called, perhaps. Particularly those BAs that spend more of their time focused on the solutions and how a solution should behave and the features that are required, how data needs to interact, and how one component behaves in relation to another, or interfaces. All of those things come under the guise of functional analysis, don't they? I think sometimes just putting a name to that can help, because then we can go and find out a little bit more about some of the models that are available, really. And I think just building on that, I mean, for me, the use of functional models is just a way to take your functional analysis to another level, to help understand information and organize it and structure it to the point that Sejal said a minute ago. but also use those pictures and models to help validate the information that you're hearing and share it in maybe a bit more consumable, maybe interesting way, I would say. So it's definitely a technique, an approach that all BAs should be familiar with, even if they're not currently working on functionality and features. So I guess that leads us on to really what functional
It helps
models do you
the non.
typically use? Sejal, sorry, Sejal, a little delay there. What was you about to say?
No, I just said it helps also the non-technical stakeholder to understand more clearly when we use and approach this model.
Absolutely. And actually, yes, really good point, because it's worth calling out that they are typically the consumers of our functional analysis. It's those instructions, isn't it, to technology, so they know what to build. Yeah. And it'd be interesting. I mean, Sejal, if I could start with you on this one first, in terms of what functional models that you might use, and how do you decide really what the right model is to use in any situation?
So I think when I choose any of the model, I use based on the context that what project phase I am into and what are the level of detailing the organization or the stakeholders are required. So when it comes to functional modeling, yes, we are very stakeholders have a very high level of view. So I break it down into the structure when they get the information that yes, how the data is going to be processed. So I use the model for the DFD, which is called the diagram detailed flow diagram. It will help the stakeholders to understand how the data is going to be flow from one system to the another system, and it will help them to use the clarity how the data is interacting with the end user or maybe the customer. So the second module I used based on the use case and the user stories to showcase the stakeholders and give them the understanding that how the actual the system or the end user is going to be interact in when it goes to the live level. And also I use few of the components for the wireframe on the mockups. It depends that even if I'm working on the web functionality or maybe the mobile Android functionality which the customer want to see. So the choosing of the best model is depend always on the context and the industry I'm into. So like currently I am into the aviation industry, which they have required the many of the operational challenge. So operational challenge means they are not getting the data clearly to interact with the multiple of the stakeholders. While doing the interaction, we always have the multiple stakeholders where the data needs to flow. So I'm much more of the depending on the flow diagram, process flow diagram, how the process are supposed to be. And when they goes to the very detailed level, when we have a higher stakeholders who wants to see the detailed level, I choose to opt the detailed flow diagram and the user entity diagram, which will help them to show that yes, what entity, what are the customer interaction they are going to be used currently, and if there is any improvisation or challenges, how to mitigate those challenges. So the more clearly and visually I just give them the information, they will able to respond fast and take the decision based on our function analysis, or you can say our choose of the module, that how soon or how clearly we are going to showcase them data.
Excellent. And as you said there,
Yes, like Sejal said, the model to choose usually depends on the project, but also, in my case, on the audience of the goal. In my last job, actually, I'm just working with lots of models in business process modeling and notation, primarily. I also uses some use case diagrams, some flow charts in general, or data flow diagrams. But mostly we work with the business process modeling notation in all our projects. We just do this because they have like an structured and detailed integration, and they have an standardized notation. So I work in a very technical world right now at the moment. So we need to be really concise and really specific when we describe the process, and when we break it into pieces. So we have to all like speak the same language. this is when we make the model to a really to the developers and a really technical work. If we have to speak with different stakeholders, sometimes I use the use case diagram, but not that often, because this will help us to see how the system interacts with the different users and which one are all the users involved in the project and what are the different interactions in between them. But yes, I mostly use the BPMN process.
Okay, excellent. And it just shows as well that that the process is still very, very fundamental to even when you're working on functionality. You still need to understand what it is that a business teams need to do before you explore some of that functionality, whether you explore it with some of the models that Sejal talked about or through use case diagrams as an example, which you also mentioned. I think building on what you both said, I think a few diagrams that I find really useful are entity relationship diagrams. When I'm talking about data and concepts that I'm not necessarily familiar with, I can start to just visualize those objects. So, for example, I am familiar with a customer, of course, but how does a customer perhaps relate to a transaction, and to how does a transaction relate to maybe a financial instrument, as an example. And when those terms come up, I can start to recognize the relationships between them at a reasonably high level, so I can just understand the context. And then building on that, I find class diagrams are quite useful to then explore the next level down in terms of attributes. Like Sejal as well, I use wireframes and other prototyping approaches to be able to visualize what reports or screens could look like as well.
True.
And while I probably use a vast amount of it, I think the next two I'll pick on, and the last two really are timing diagrams, which are particularly useful, I find, in bridging really the process and actually starting to share some information around acceptable timings for when each process or steps can be completed. It's I found that the timing and representing the process within a timing diagram, the time taken to typically progress through, or the time we need, that we can't exceed, as an example, really does paint the picture in quite a simple way, and probably demonstrates the simplicity of some models and the effectiveness. You probably don't need to be an expert to read them, even though you probably need a little bit of expertise as a BA to be able to put them together. And then the last technique I'll talk about in that sense is a control flow diagram as well, which is really just a way to show the different paths through a system, through a process, in a lot simpler, easier way than a process flow or other models that I've used. I particularly find it useful because, one, I'm speaking to stakeholders, whether it's one-to-one, in small groups, or even in a workshop. It's a very easy technique to use and explore, and I think people can tend to recognise what is happening without having to be an expert themselves. And it's also a technique that is probably one of the most flexible. So I don't, if I get halfway through and then I'm informed of a step that we've missed, it's very easy to go back to it and add a new node and a new branch to a control flow diagram to include things that I hadn't thought about. Which means that we have different conversations with different stakeholders as well. I can just build and build on the same model until ultimately I've got a view of all the required or all the actual paths.
Sure.
So two probably additional ones there that I would add. I wonder, Gustavo, I mean, in terms of functional analysis, what are the main challenges that you tend to experience, and how have you overcome them?
Okay, yes, that's a good question. In general, the most challenging problem that I face, it's the most wide problem that I face. It's when we create the flows as is and to be, and I find a lot of resistance to change in all the stakeholders when you show them the new process or the development that you wanted to achieve, and to get them involved in that change for for me, that's a challenge that I must overcome at the beginning of the work, to have them everything in place and to pull everyone in the same direction.
Okay.
This aligns with the misalignment between stakeholders, because sometimes all the different areas of a company have different versions or different needs in the same process, and put them all together to work in the same direction. For me, that's the biggest challenge facing and aligning in this analysis, in this process.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a point, Gustavo, that resonates quite a lot with me because, as you appreciate, when we talk about different models and functional analysis, there's very rarely one perspective that we work with and speak to. So if you speak to different perspectives, they're not always in agreement, and sometimes one individual is more of an expert than another, so they're able to provide a different lens or different information as well. So I find that having the models is a good way of exploring those different levels of understanding. So overall, you paint that picture that satisfies the needs of all your stakeholders. So, Joe, what would be your insight on that point around challenges and how you overcome them as well, please?
Thank you for the question. Gusto has point out a very fair that yes, this is something challenging when we are working on any of the project. What will be the as in and to be flow diagram? The most challenge what I face is one is with the documentation. When we have the previous any of the complex system or process, there are documentation which needs to be done in the previous before we came into the picture, which I could not find properly. So we need to be start over again when we enter into the industry or the organization. Okay, what is the current system is, and yes, how we are going to be change it as per the stakeholder. Between those as in and to the changing, there might be some issues with the stakeholders also, because I deal with the long process in a very complex process when it comes to the airports or the airline, where we have the multiple stakeholders. And if my system is getting the receiving and responding from the other two or three system, it's the interface that we are interacting, then I need to be get aligned to those systems who are using the third party. It means we have more stakeholders to deal with and get into the same page. So the more documentation clarity we do have previously and the currently, the more the stakeholders will going to be the confidence that yes, it will be the go ahead for the changes which the organization or system supposed to be does. So one is, yes, what is the documentation, and second is the stakeholder. So how I try recently in the past few years to overcome this challenge by defining the RACI metrics, where each roles and responsibility and accountability will become over. Because to be the fact of this word, now we are living on that era where we don't want to touch or interact with the other problems. So every stakeholders is limited to their roles and responsibility. And when it comes to the functional interaction between the system, then yes, we receive the response from the other system, which needs to be clear. Okay, now that third party X or Y intervention is required to get the response clearly. So that's the latestly from the last 2-3 years when I enter into the aviation. It is quite tricky for me first to understand, okay, because I'm not getting the response. So I start documenting the RACI metrics, who and when there needs to be accountable for their process or for their data to be stored or maybe to the process.
Yeah, and the point you made around the existing documentation, I'm sure we can all sort of resonate with that one. We all
Yeah.
probably have our own experience of it in different ways, good or bad. But it does demonstrate that, as a business analyst, where there is existing documentation, there's a huge amount of benefit. But equally, probably the work that we produce and the analysis that we complete, that may well become the documentation that a BA in the future picks up from us. So it's probably important, or it is very important, therefore, to make sure that that document could be picked up by somebody else, understood context in which it's produced, and hopefully is understood, whether it's read immediately by the development team or in a few years to come by the users of the system or another BA, as you say, as well. So I think a very interesting point. And I couldn't agree more as well about the stakeholders being so key on that as well. And various challenges about stakeholders, but the main one is really, I guess, just making sure that we're involved in all of them and the different perspectives that they have, which is a point Gustavo brought in earlier as well. You know, and probably making sure that we give all of them time to share their perspectives, which is the most important thing, because otherwise we won't have a system that works for all the stakeholders that are going to use it.
Yes, of course.
I think as well, I mean, additional challenges I might share as well is really that sometimes, whether it's the technical audience or the business, who both of which need to review the functional models and the functional analysis that we put together, they don't always have all of the the experience to be able to necessarily read a fully detailed specification or to understand all the models that we might put together. So we definitely need to be mindful as BAs to guide them through the process, play back as we've created a model based on a conversation, how it reflects what has been said and what's been requested, so they can understand it. And therefore, when we present it more formally later, that it's recognisable and it's not as daunting perhaps as it might otherwise seem. And if while we're doing that, we can explain to them the benefits of a functional model or a concise document ahead of them having to read a whole load more detail than they might otherwise have, perhaps they'll appreciate the benefits of what we're trying to do on their behalf. But maybe the flip side as well is also, it's easy to assume that perhaps your business stakeholders won't always understand the models that you're explaining, while they will understand the business context. Perhaps it's sometimes also overlooked that the technical team don't always understand the detail that's within your document, quite understandably. So we shouldn't assume that they're going to know all about terms that we put in the document. We shouldn't assume they're going to know about the business. We shouldn't even assume that they know all of the functional models, even though they probably would know some of them. So how I tend to overcome that is just be clear with them before I start doing the detailed analysis on what approaches I'm probably going to take. Find out from them if there's any insight that they might want to share in terms of how they might prefer to receive the information or their level of familiarity as well, because it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to change my approach, but it probably means I'm going to prepare to spend more time with them, talking through and walking through the documentation so they understand exactly what it is, or being available actually throughout the development as well. Which probably brings me on to one other point that springs to mind is, that challenge of just making sure that we as a BA are not operating in a waterfall manner when the development team are working in an agile way, or vice versa. I think irrespective of techniques, that lack of alignment in the way we collaborate, the way we time our analysis or delivery, that's not going to help anybody. So I think getting on the same page there is probably as fundamental. But I'm sure people watching this are probably screaming at the telly now that they've got another 10 challenges to share that we haven't mentioned. If they have, feel free to put them in the comments, I would say, because there's probably more than we can fill in this time slot. I wonder though, just moving on to a slightly different topic. So Joe, if I can ask you this question first, in terms of, are there any trends or techniques in functional modelling that you've seen or adopted in recent years? And how have they impacted your analysis?
For the trending, what I observed from the last 2-3 years into my business analyst journey, within the agile perspective, although the agile was introduced in 2001, but what I observed into the industry and into the organization also, they are going to be adapting more now. So people are going to be more focused on the agile, that yes, the small work amount which needs to be delivered to the stakeholders, we go on the development side and see the small area of the a small system, that how that system is worked, and deliver it to the customer and see what's their response based on the feedback. So first trend is the agile, which is quite, you can say, the upcoming trends which the industries is adopting. And second is, am I audible? Sorry, you are
Yeah,
freeze.
yeah, you are, definitely are. Yep,
Right. Yeah. So second trend which I observe is the journey mapping. Why? Because what I observe, when you are dealing with the stakeholders, we have the higher stakeholders. They are on a very broad level of the minding, high level of the system designing, that how it will work. For us being a BA into the system for a particular project, they want to see the entire journey. They want to see the entire customer journey, either the service which the company is providing, the product is providing, how the entire journey is going to be looks like. So the mapping of the journey with the customer side and with the service or vice versa product which the company is providing, they want to see how it will fit into the entire journey, and how it will help the other organization being as a benchmark, because every organization wants to be the benchmark into the industry. So they want to look in a very higher level of the model, which is going to be in a very trend now. Earlier people are more focusing, okay, my product is good, my product is working to the company, my service is good in the company. But now we have the more competitors in every field, going start from the human challenging, going forward, you can say, the space also, we have completely different kind of the competitors. So in the high level of perspective, they want to see the whole journey, how it will fit into the our industry, and how we will be the benchmark which will be represent and used to the other organization and becoming the best. So these are the trends which I observe into nowadays. And in a BA, my showcase, my also approach is to see them in a very higher level, how it will looks like when it will help with the customer. So it is not about the product functionality. They want to also see how it will fit with the industry level when it comes to their particular industry. Either we are into the aviation, or maybe e-commerce, or for the infrastructure also. This is the
absolutely.
trends I.
Gustavo, what's your perspective on that same point in terms of trends or techniques that you've adopted?
Okay, John, I'm gonna talk to you about my personal journey about on how I adopted the new techniques. In my personal case, I moved to Italy from 2 years ago, and in Italy I started working in the fintech industry. So when I shifted to this new world, let's say that like that, high tech level, I have to incorporate the agile modeling, and in a more collaborative manner. As also I said before, the BPMN process modeling. All this together, it came into a more standardized process documentation. When I also use story mapping to improve alignment between all the parts and the technical teams. These methods help me to make more visual and understandable for all the stakeholders, because I have to communicate with different kinds of stakeholders, the really technical stuff, part, and the client that it doesn't speak the language. So this helped me to reduce misunderstandings. Looking ahead in the future, I would like to explore some points like process automation, making flow diagrams to be executed by themselves. For instance, to help making regression tests automatically. So this
Yeah,
helps a lot of time for the company. As we know, like with every new development, that you have to do a regression test. So if you have a really well documented process flow and it could be automated, this one could be done with no human effort. And talking about that, I will also like to include in my package knowledge, artificial intelligence, of course, generative in artificial intelligence to make a process more reliable, more simple, to identify bottlenecks. Also, I know that you can do all this with data-driven modeling. That's another part of my journey in the future. So yes, I think it's been a quite transforming journey for me this couple of last years.
Yeah, yeah. And the points you made there as well, I mean, they marry nicely with what Sejal was talking about in terms of, the trends around, really maintaining, I guess, that view of the process, but importantly, thinking about the customer component to it. I think we've put more emphasis now, quite rightly, on, what is the customer's experience, what's the customer's journey, rather than just what is the internal organization's process that delivers things to the customer. I think that is a positive step in the right direction. And then tools like that Sejal mentioned around, or techniques such as, journey mapping as well, just allows us to think about that. I think benchmarking you mentioned as well, Sejal, is really important way for us to, I think there's more of an appetite to see how others are performing and how you could get better by comparing yourself to your peers, or comparing the experience of your customers perhaps to experience they could get elsewhere. And I feel like those things are very much sort of underpinned by a greater access to data. Certainly, I know one of the struggles I would have had a while ago as a BA would have been around accessing data. And I think that a recent trend is being able to, as a BA, get easier access to the data, to model with it, to make it part of any proposed solutions and modeling as well. And I think, tools like Power Apps, as we might discuss later, they're a really a useful way to provide that ready access. I think as well, I think one last thing I would add is, in terms of recent trends, is really just that move away from probably trying to be too technical and actually trying now to tell more of a story that informs the development team, whether it's iteratively or upfront, tells them more of a story as to what they are expected to deliver, and how we can bring a bit more of that story together through visualization and data of different models and journeys, as you both put as well. I'm sure again that's one of those topics we could talk about for a little bit longer. But perhaps if we talk about we talk about trends, but now we move on to tools, and I wonder, in that sense, I mean, Gustavo, are there any tools or software that you prefer using or for creating or managing functional models? And if so, why do you find them useful?
All right. Yes. First of all, I try to adapt and to use the software or the software that aligns with the company if they don't have anyone at the moment. But for instance, I started using to draw process flow. I used to use Microsoft Visio at the beginning of my journey, because it was versatility, creating flowcharts and basic diagrams. But as my work evolved and I needed to draw different types of flows, I start to use them, BPMN more and more. I start to use Camunda and Adonis. These two softwares, I really feel really comfortable with them. They are really easygoing, understandable. All the upgrades they do, they're easy to incorporate. It's really, for me, it's like an extension of my arm at the moment. I just grab and drop and design as I please. I can change it backwards, forward. It doesn't block me in like my creation. It's like I feel like I'm an artist drawing the flow, and if I have a new idea, I can draw it back again. I don't have to start in paper. I just start in the computer, because at first with Visio, I have to do it in paper first and then going into the computer, because it was really difficult to rechange it. At the moment,
True.
you just can cut, drop, pin. For me, those tools are much better. And if I have to go to a more low-level diagrams, not as structured, I sometimes prefer Mirror or Lucid charts because we have they are more easygoing for presentations. They have so many ways to communicate, to share, and to work in teams. So it depends, but those are my preferred tools.
And Gustavo, sorry to ask you again, but you mentioned the two tools there. Was it Adonis and what was the other tool you mentioned before that?
Adonis and Camunda.
Camunda. And what was the purpose of Camunda and Adonis? What do they tend to model, or is it everything?
Those two tools for me, they are really specific for BPMN.
Okay.
Use them for that. And what I like about them, first of all, they are free. They have a really wide variety of tools in the free version, and they are really open to collaboration. And for example, with Camunda, you can draw a process flow, and then you can upgrade it to an automated process flow. So
Okay.
I haven't used that part yet, but I intend to.
Excellent. Thank you. And thanks for clarifying that. So, what tools do you prefer to use?
Yeah, so Gusto has covered most because when we start our BA journey, we use, of course, MS Visio. We start to draw, but like he said that firstly, I also prefer to make my diagram in pen and paper than go to the computer side. But the tools which are quite handy from the last few years, it's also depend that which project I'm working, because sometimes I work with the application, sometimes I work with the web designing, and sometimes it's the product. So it depends quite on that. But the most tool I was quite handy with most people don't know these tools because it's quite free. And earlier to practice this as a BA, I use free tools like Pencil. There is one tool named Pencil. They have a limited, you can say, configurations or limited models in have. But yes, that's quite easy to, you can say the frame was really easy to use. The second, for the BPMN, I used quite a specific balsamic tool. This is the functionalities is quite easy to use us when customer are on hurry, and I observe everyone is on hurry all the time when they need the visual diagrams. So this is quite tools when I just pick the models, okay, this and this thing, because balsamic is quite something which will adjust on their own even if we just put in drag and drop. So I just need to focus the flow diagram only, that yes, where the flow is going to be worked. And it is when I recently joined this organization, it is highly depend that whom I am collaborating with. If I'm collaborating within India, my country, then okay, I can work on Excel, also on the PowerPoint to make them the presentation. But latestly, if I am working on the global project where the China and Singapore are going to be interact and see the process flow day to day or maybe weekly basis, I prefer working on the Confluence and Jira pages to make the updates so that they will be updated by heart, and it will help us to them also update on the weekly status, where are we, and if I have any question I can ask them easily on the Confluence page if I'm stuck in any of the flow. So these flow I mostly use in my journey. Helps me, of course, based on the day-to-day interaction. Recently, because since AI has been introducing, so our life as a BA is quite going to be simple when I come into a very fresh project where I don't have any idea. So one tool I just recommended to everyone who will watch this session. This is the AI tool which they call the napkin.ai. Okay, this
Okay.
tool is quite helpful for the person who is doesn't know that how the flow work. What you will do, we just write the description, okay, how the connectivity and the flow needs to be done, and that AI tool will be read those contexts which you have written and make the flow. So by using this tool, I have gotten the idea, okay, how can I start the flow and get to the end. Of course, AI will help us not to giving the proper, but it will help us to give the start point where we can start our flow into the tools which we are using specifically.
Yeah. Yeah, and actually, really interesting that you brought that up because, it means we don't have to know all of the tools up front. We could go into, AI, Gen AI tools and ChatGPT as an example and ask about the tools that are available for a particular task, and we might learn about new ones. I mean, no surprise that we're learning about tools on this session. Like Adonis as one example, Camunda, which I've not heard of before, or even Pencil. I've heard about the traditional pencil, but not the application. So definitely one that I shall look at, as well as napkin, as well as John. And I'm sure there's new tools coming out all the time. I recently saw BPMN.io, which I thought was really useful for processes. But there's Power Apps as well is proving to be very useful in terms of modeling data, building up your database, testing, creating screens, and actually workable models and prototypes that actually you can test and hand over to maybe the business even in some cases. So I think that's particularly useful. I think it's interesting as well you mentioned Visio, because despite the fact there being a load of great tools out there, like Gustavo, I started with Visio. And actually, there's times where I come back to it. I work for particular clients at different times, and Visio might be the tool. They haven't necessarily brought in anything specific, so it still shows its versatility, and it probably demonstrates that that whilst you don't have to rely on an extensive knowledge of tools. We can go into ChatGPT as an example and find new tools, or watch sessions like this and learn of new tools, or speak to colleagues. There's also a need for the techniques themselves, some of which we've spoken about as well, like whether it's control flows, whether it's BPMN, whether it's data flow diagrams, knowing how to draw it in pen and paper or on Visio will just give you the basis to use it properly, I think, and efficiently in any tool that you choose to use. So, some great points there that you both made. I know we're short on time, so maybe we can close by just sharing any advice that you have, Sejal, first on advice to aspiring business analysts on how they might master functional analysis or modeling techniques themselves.
Yeah, it's for me, right? Yeah. So yes, as a business analyst going into the functional analysis, my advice is first clear the business need, because tools and techniques will come and go, but the clarity on the business, why we are actually doing it for the changes, is going to be stay with us and help us, because our main perspective is always to help the business and to support that the best technical way and functional way to give the solution. So yeah, tools and techniques will come. Business clarity needs the first one, which I will suggest. And yes, always stay curious that how strong we can give the ideas, because what I observed that every people have the different perspective. I might think different to make the flow visualization. Other person can be better than me because of their experience. So yes, everybody needs to be put their experience that how the data can be better managed, how the functionality can be better managed easily, which will help the other stakeholders to make understand clear and have the clear requirement ambiguity. And the last is, which I always share with each of the BAs and the other stakeholders also, that always share the knowledge, because it will not decrease our, and whatever the perspective and the knowledge you are sharing to the other person, that they might be used for a small period of time, but the knowledge you are giving and the statement you are giving based on your whole process which you have worked on. So everyone has different. So yeah. And one more thing is, which will help me in my journey from the as a BA, and which will help me to continue to work as a BA, is to do the certification for the IIBA, because that book will give us a very much clarity how to do it. Is also these are all the concepts which I pick it up from there, along with my personal experience, industry level. But yes, being a BA, it has helped you a lot. Even if you know not go opting for the exam, just go by reading the web book. It is free for all of us. But
Agree.
yeah.
Agree. Gustavo, what will be your final advice to any aspiring BAs?
Okay, first of all, I agree with everything that Sejal said. I believe that information, being ahead of the wave, being informed, of course, getting a certification, any of those that are in the market, I saw them, they're really good. But my personal advice on top of that, it will be that practice. Just get in there and practice. Make your hands dirty, start practicing, start doing just some flows. At the beginning, you're not gonna know how to do it, how to write it, how to bring that information that you have in your head into the diagram. But with practice, trying to simplify all the flows of the diagrams, start with something easy, and from there to scale up. And of course, as we are doing it now, just practice also to communicate, because you can have a really good diagram, a really good structure, but if you are not able to communicate it, I don't know if it's going to be worth it or it's going to have the impact that it should. So start to doing real life scenarios. If you're not working in a company, or perhaps you are working in a company and the company doesn't care about diagrams or doesn't care about flow diagrams or any kind, you can start doing them and present it to your boss or to your partners. I think that's a good idea how to start it. And if you're not working anywhere, just go and you can collaborate with an ONG or pick some information from internet. I think practice make the master. So that's my advice.
Yeah, excellent
Great.
advice. And that, as is well, I've been a point around, if there's a technique you want to introduce and you're not necessarily getting the upfront buy-in from the stakeholders, try it and then present to them, the benefit of using that technique. And probably you'll find out yourself before you present it that if it's not good enough, you won't present it because you'll already know. But if it is good enough, then you can put it forward. And I think on that point as well, I think just getting used to sharing with others, presenting to others, talking about the benefits of the approaches and techniques that you're using, why you're using it as well. That can only help sort of add that understanding and that knowledge and that context that you can have when modeling and conducting analysis. I think the last thing I would add as well is just to be inquisitive and to look at what others are doing, whether that's colleagues using techniques you've not seen before, or watching videos that have got techniques on that you've not seen. Just be open to recognizing what you could adopt yourself and maybe make part of your own toolkit. Excellent. But I mean, the advice you've both given, I'm sure is resonating, certainly did with me. So I really appreciate you taking the time. I look forward to speaking to you both again on other topics, whether it's functional analysis or modeling or BA in general. But I'd just like to say thank you for your time and look forward to seeing you next time, as I said. So thank you. Thank you, everybody, for watching.
Thank you, John.
Thanks, John.